What's up, everybody? It's Mike. We're back here on the Pitch Please podcast. And today I've got Dwayne, co founder of Mantle. They're an AI based platform for founders to help manage their cap tables. A whole bunch of words in there that maybe you don't understand. So we're going to unpack it today. But Dwayne, over to you. Give yourself a quick introduction and we'll talk a little bit about your amazing experiences that have led up to being the co founder of Mantle. And then I'd love to make sure we dive into a bunch of these things, demystify cap tables today, some of the challenges behind it, why and where your technology fits in. Super excited, but let's learn a little bit about you before we go any further.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Great intro. Wow. Um, yeah, I'm Dwayne. I'm the CTO and co-founder over at Mantle. Been spending the last, 25 plus years coding solutions. Have made everything from application platforms to your favorite mobile apps to now managing people's equity. So I kind of started off like my parents were actually financial planners, and actually my first application that I deployed to production helped with their back office stuff. And it's almost like doing a full circle all the way back to helping companies organize their equity and finances in this way. So, um, I love to dive into it and talk about any or all of it. It's great.
I love it. So maybe let's start there. You were talking about, I guess you always kind of had some technical aptitude, since it sounds like even as a child, your parents were in financial planning and investing and you were helping them build some applications right from the get-go. Did you always think you were going to be an entrepreneur, or was this just like the builder in you looking to solve problems? Like that obviously was you building to solve a first problem, but maybe how did that come to be? And did you think you were going to be an entrepreneur?
No, I don't. I think I kind of like backed into it. I've always been a problem chaser, so I think that's where it came from. Um, I think listening to people and listening to or going deep on somebody's situation and pulling out the right questions and pulling out the right problems that are worthwhile like solving for that person. People always describe me as a good listener, so maybe that's how I land there. Um, but no, like back in high school, I actually ended up, picking up PHP. My parents were trying to help pay franchisees, and my mom had these like spreadsheets on spreadsheets of doing calculations like every month. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can make an application to solve all of this for you. And there's a whole portal where everybody, like every office, put in their numbers. We automatically did the calculations. It would print it out. And my mom didn't have to do all this work. So my coding career kind of like, dovetailed out from there. Just searching for these problems.
That's wild. And I love that you started that story, because like now, and it comes to something we're talking about a bit before the show. You are probably a unicorn unto your own right, because technical co-founders are super rare. They're hard to find. I've talked to a lot of founders looking and searching for that perfect match. But even the things you were talking about now, it's so cool that now how far we've come in terms of application buildings. You could probably do that with low code or no code solutions. But that was your first venture and it wasn't that easy back then. I'm like saying it's a lot easier now, but it's crazy how far we've come to enable more and more people to build things with way less technical background. But it's cool that you started there. You helped them build that, but then you ended up sort of working at, you said over 20-25 years in startups and that type of thing. So you went to school. Take me on the journey. Where did you go next, and what sort of led to where you went into that startup world versus like something else as you were kind of looking for these problems?
So I actually ended up not going to university.
Okay.
So after building that thing for my parents, I actually got another job at a startup, and it was actually a really good lesson on startup timing. So first of all, my family's from the Caribbean. Like education is everything. So when you tell
Yeah.
them you're not going to school, they're like, "What are you doing with your life?"
Yeah. Yeah. How did that go down?
It wasn't an easy conversation, but I'm like, hey, I just want to work, and if I ever get to a place where I need the piece of paper, I'll go back and get it. But until then, I want to work and kind of like really understand what I want to focus on before going into school. Because I like this coding thing. I'm like, I don't know if it's great. I like solving these big problems with it, but I'm not sure if it's really for me. So I went into the startup. It was one of the first companies that was putting screens into restaurants and almost like elevators too. So I made a whole backend that would serve the advertisements and menus and everything else to these screens from a central location. Um, the problem with that startup was it was too early. So for getting like an 18-inch flat screen back then was like $1,000, like $1,200, and they weren't the most stable things. They were kind of thick and they would overheat. Um, so we didn't have the runway to really uh, see that startup really run into its own. Right. It wasn't until like 5, maybe 8 years later that I started seeing them show up in restaurants and everything else. I would message the founder, and I was like, "Oh, we were just too early. It was a great idea." And he was like, "Yeah, but
That
timing is
is
everything."
crazy though, right? Like that is a good lesson in timing because like as you were saying that, I'm like, holy shit, like that's everywhere. You were part of that? And you're like, well, I was, but like a little bit early. And it's interesting that you isolated the challenge to being like it was actually the hardware limitation on costing and implementation. The software capabilities sound like they were there. It's tricky. So is there anything from that learning that you would take away as the hey, more energy on the MVP or managing what your economics might be, or maybe you're like, hey, just it's learning on timing. You go until you find out there is that type of a blocker, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, I think it was kind of like a yeah, revenue versus cost lesson, and then also the timing on hardware, like just the understanding that like, hey, you can have a really valuable solution, but like if I am taking, Gen 1 of mini LED TVs, which are right now are like really expensive, if you wait, a while, you kind of watch the curve of that cost going down versus what your revenue projections are, there is a point there where you can really jump on a bunch of solutions. And if you jump on it too early, it sucks. If you jump on it too late, somebody else has probably like jumped on it. So it's like really watching those trends and curves, especially like even now with AI, right? Like it costs a lot to run an AI model, especially if you want to do a large batch operation, like transforming code from one language to another, like a whole code base. It can add up to a lot of time and effort, but all of those processes are going to get a lot easier over the next year or two, and there's going to be an inflection point where a bunch of new innovation is going to happen just from running things more efficiently, not even creating something new.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we've obviously talked to hardware. We talked about like software processing capabilities. It's like kind of that joke meme. I don't know if everyone's seen it, but it's sort of like they've built an AI solution. They've like white labeled something that's like just sitting on like open AI consumer grade. And like someone's like, well, how much is this costing us and how much are we selling it for? And like, you don't want to know. Just get users. But in the same regard, there's some people I've talked to in the legal space, which maybe even some of this impacts what you're doing. But there's like some changes that were impacted specifically through COVID around the ability to do certain elements of legal transactions in a virtual way, which the Law Society until COVID it was absolute zero, no. So their idea literally could not have existed fundamentally before COVID. And that changed that. And so unless you knew the mechanics of that, the timing was so critical to that inflection point. So it's super cool. We haven't talked about the timing as much on the show lately, but it's cool that you've got like a story around that hardware consideration, software consideration, processing capability, and obviously like there's legal consideration, probably so many more. So from there, like that didn't work out. Sorry, man. That was brilliant idea though. You guys are working on some cool stuff. Where did you go from there?
I joined another startup that was with they essentially adopted a model out of Australia. They were doing um, pretty much coordination around WSIB compliance in workplaces, which is not a place I would ever thought I would end up. But I ended up meeting one of the founders, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. I can check this out for a little while. And it was a great business. Nothing exists like it in Canada. The founders had built up a great business and were ready to take it more into a digital realm, more automated realm, and I was going to help them with that. Um, but it unfortunately ended up being a lesson in where I made sure that I make sure that the founders have a really good relationship before joining a company. Um, and it turns out
Like
in
with
this
themselves.
with
as a
themselves. Yeah,
founding team.
yeah. I think a lot of maybe like first time founders or anything else when they're starting their company, I don't think they realize how much of a relationship you'll have with the other founders. Like day and night, you're messaging each other. You're going to be, inviting each other to Christmas, but also like during Christmas dinner, you might message each other and be like, "Hey, this thing popped up," and you're going to answer. So you essentially enter this relationship with another person, and it's going to have everything else from a normal relationship, all the ups and downs, and you kind of continue to work through them. But in this particular case, the founders were married, so they were in an actual relationship, um, and they were going through their ups and downs. So
On two
it
fronts, apparently,
yeah,
because so
yeah.
deeply tied.
So
Okay. So from there, that was like, hey, that startup shut down or was just too tumultuous and you're like, I got to leave. Or what was sort of the scenario and where'd you go from there?
yeah, that was becoming non-productive for the company. So I'm a person who really wants to make forward progress, and there was a bunch of this social things that were and relational things that were holding it back. From there, from the previous companies and from like my parents, I noticed like a norm like a similar problem across all of them where people needed to coordinate their workforce and a bunch of operations in the business. So I kind of made kind of like the lightweight version of like Google Sheets Drive workspace for businesses before that, like more for like contractors and people with franchisees, and you're like, hey, what are your company cycles? Who do you need to
Kind
remind
of came
people
back
about
to
this
what
and
you were
that?
helping your parents with.
Yeah. So I noticed about that overall problem. All of the previous companies that I worked with were my clients. And I did that for about like half a year. It was me and I had one other person helping me. It wasn't that big. Um, so that was fun to just build something new. I didn't get into the whole, hard equity problems at that point. I registered a business and just went for it. Um, and then I got tricked into my job at Extreme Labs. I always say that, putting it on the record. I was tricked, but it was a great trick.
Tricked.
So I love it.
Tell us about the trick. What was Extreme Labs and what was the trick?
Yeah, I had a buddy from high school that had been kind of keeping up with me during my journey, and he was just like, "Hey, you need to come check out Extreme Labs." And I kind of brushed him off for a good like 4 months, but he kept on trying. And he was just like, "Hey, we're going to be playing some FIFA at the office. You should just come hang out."
Oh,
And
shit.
I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, cool." So I was like, "Fine, you can bug me for a while. I'll come to play games." And they took me into the games room. We're playing games. We're having drinks. And then as I was playing FIFA, they started asking me technical questions.
Like
Um,
mid game, like trying to throw your game off.
yeah.
So was it like an interview or were they just trying to like mess your FIFA game up? You never know with people these days.
Yeah. So like at some point I had to put down the controller and start answering their questions. I'm like, oh, these are curious. And then eventually the founders came in and talked to me. And then that was the Friday, and they were like, hey, we need you to start on Monday.
Wow.
So I started talking to a few folks there. It was the first time I've encountered pair programming, where two people are working on the same machine on the same problem. I've always been solo, so figuring out things by myself was, I could always do it, but I was like, oh, this is a really curious thing. There was really cool projects they're working on. Mobile had just become a thing. I had just bought my, first iPhone, the first one, and like, this is a new computing platform. I need to check it out. Start building some stuff, and they already had some large projects doing it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to learn a ton here. Um, I usually try to strive towards, learning while building. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to join this company, and then I was employee number 8 or
Wow.
9 or something like that there at Extreme Labs. And then over the next 4.5 years, I think we were 350. So
Wow. Well, what's interesting is like I personally haven't heard about Extreme Labs. I'm sure some people might have, but I think what happened next is pretty interesting because more people will start to hear about these names. So you were like employee like 8. What went down in Extreme Labs?
so we were kind of the premier mobile shop for North America. So we were consulting. Our engagements would be anywhere from like years to months, really. Um, but it was really cool to be, kind of in my, mid 20s, learning all this new tech, but also working with, like HP and working with CBS. We did the NBA app. We worked on Twitter. We worked on Facebook.
That's
Like
sick.
working with all these brands, traveling to these companies, working with them on site, traveling to the West Coast, New York, everywhere else. And we also did like pretty much all the banking apps in Canada for BlackBerry and
So you're like a
iOS.
super like mobile first dev consulting team that would come in and help brands that had no idea their head from their ass. This
Yeah.
new world of mobile and what these like at that time would they have been cloud native apps? Or they were still
No.
like no, they were still like VM based monolithic apps,
Yeah.
but needing to reach out to multi-form factor. Like that was actually like a breaking point where people realized you couldn't just have a website anymore.
Yeah.
You'd have like multi-form factor, multi-screen scaling. Like that was like a big moment for people.
Yeah. So we're helping people wrangle with this like new computing platform, and that led out to making backends and APIs and everything else because those all need to coordinate with the mobile apps. But that was a really fun ride. We ended up doing like a few government jobs. Like we did the bid for the Pan Am Games. That was a
Oh,
project I worked on. And at some point, like Delta McGuinty came in and did a speech in our office because we're scaling so hard and we're doing things. So it was a lot of fun.
that's cool. So where did you go from Extreme Labs? Since you got suckered in during a FIFA game, this sounds like you stuck around for a little while longer after that FIFA game, huh?
Yeah, we got acquired by Pivotal.
Okay.
And Pivotal was making a cloud application platform. And I switched straight into R&D and straight into that part of the company, and ended up becoming a director of the Toronto office. Grew that from, I believe it was 17 or 18 people up to about 80. And then they gave me more offices, so I ended up managing the New York and Denver office
Wow.
for Pivotal, and uh, running around doing way too much traveling. That's when I learned you can do too much traveling. I used to like crave it, and then after a while I was like, oh, I just want to be home. But if you had to travel to two places on a regular basis, like Denver and New York are not bad at all, so I'm not complaining too hard.
Good to know. Actually, before we even go too much further into Pivotal, because I think there's a contrast piece here. So your employee 8 grew to like 350, you said?
Yes.
What was
Yes.
like the best part and the hardest part of that? Because I know a few people that have been in this situation and now they're in like Series C, Series D companies. And I always just think it's cool to reflect on that experience of like what did they enjoy about that? Because you see it, glamorized definitely in shows, but you see pros and cons. What was sort of your lived experience?
The best part, and I think it's different if you're a product versus a consulting company,
Mm,
but I think the best part was being in a place that would challenge you every like 6 months or with every new engagement, essentially. Um, because once you finish the project, you're like, what's the next one? And the list would
mm.
be all these big brands who are trying big ideas, all their like moonshots, or you're working on something like, that's something that has millions of users every day. Um, so from a consulting shop that has that kind of volume and that kind of reputation, that was by far the best experience.
And that probably ties back well to the part you talked about earlier, which is like you just love solving problems and looking for
Yes.
these challenges. So this is like every 6 months you got a new one. You're like, yes.
Yeah. There's
How do we
actually
figure it out?
there was an internal there was an internal tool at Extreme Labs where CIBC came to us to make an app called Home Advisor on BlackBerry, back when BlackBerry was super popular. And they were like, hey, we want to have a full map. We want to overlay this data, that data, all this crime stuff and everything else. And eventually, well, a lot of people are saying you can't do that. Like BlackBerry Maps back then, they allow you to put one pin and like one line of text, and that's all you could do with the map. It just wasn't in a place where you could do
Mm,
anything, any kind of overlays. Um, and I asked for like 3 weeks, no, 2 or 3 weeks of extra budget in their contract, and I'm like, let me take a stab at this, and ended up making a full map solution from scratch.
wow.
That got coined as Dwayne Maps in Extreme Labs, and it ended up into Groupon, the Groupon app, AccuWeather, and like every other app that we made after that that had maps. We used
Yeah,
that
yeah.
that technology. So like those kinds of problems are really interesting to solve. The ones that like people don't want to tackle that provide a lot of value, but like if you spend the time, you could really figure it out.
That's cool. So then you went to Pivotal Software, which is obviously I think a lot more people probably have heard of Pivotal Software, fairly large company. How early? Because so Extreme Labs got acquired by Pivotal, and so then you joined Pivotal. You were growing out the Toronto office, then helping grow out Denver and New York. You were saying, how big were they when you started, and sort of what did they grow up to, and what were you guys offering there?
I'm not sure. I think Pivotal was around maybe like 1,000 folks when we
Okay,
got acquired. And then towards the tail end, it was closer to 5,000, I believe.
wow,
Definitely
big
between in
numbers.
between 3 or 5,000 for sure. I think it's closer to 5,000. Um, but yeah, that was a different part of the journey. Going from consulting to making a cloud application platform that, eventually, pretty much like 80% of the Fortune 500 ended up using. So this goes from making mobile apps and, fairly simple, straightforward APIs. We still need to get them through, bank compliance and everything else, to like now there's governments using our application platform, which means we have to go through FedRAMP. Google also leads like security compliance things, worry about CVEs. It was a different engineering mode to be in. Both super valuable experiences. I think I credit those two experiences to make me like very well rounded as an engineer. Um, but yeah, like, another really interesting, super valuable experience. And learned a bunch about management as well, managing those offices.
Yeah, was that um like the structure of it? Like when you go from that company size to near 5,000, like the structure, like one of the things I've heard before, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but some people that have grown up in fast growing startups and been early on the ground and are maybe more technical in nature, like yourself or something else, is the challenges you sometimes face are not being as hands on as you used to be, because now you're managing teams and you're a little bit more at arm's length, and that some people enjoy that, right? There's you because you talked about this piece, the management element and your skill development there. But some people are like, hey, I don't get to do what I used to really love doing. What did that look like for you? And talk us through that transformation of like sub 1,000 to near 5,000, big numbers.
Yeah, I think managing a larger group, you definitely got a sense of that. Um, I think the way I saw it was I myself was not focusing on building the product. Like, you definitely wanted to like talk to customers, make sure the right feedback was going to teams and everything else. Um, but then the product almost turned into the org itself for me.
Mm.
So as my teams were, having trouble coordinating, or as they needed to move around projects, or like, hey, this product needs to be deprecated and then a new version needs to come out, or we need to make a new version of the API, doing all the coordination in between all of them is it's almost like designing a system that needs to run smoothly, almost like a code base. But then there was also the fact that for all of these little in between coordination pieces, it actually benefited a lot when I was writing code for them. So I actually was still writing code as a leader to get all of my performance numbers, or help teams understand the metrics that are making us move smoothly as an organization. I was writing all of that code. So no matter what problem space I'm in, I always find a way to code something.
That's cool. You guys still got to roll up your sleeves, and so you're there for a while. Actually, like a couple, what, like 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, we got acquired October 2013.
Make sure to send me a note, by the way, whenever you're joining a company, because I'm feeling like there's like acquisition aura that you send some acquisition vibes, and I'm liking it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I should, you know, pick up a lucky rabbit's foot or something. I don't know. But yeah, we've been super fortunate and blessed in this regard. But yeah, 2013, and then I don't Pivotal. It's either EMC or Dell. EMC picked up Pivotal, and then Dell bought EMC. Um, and then VMware acquired Pivotal.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting. You don't have to tell me like, how many private jets you now own, but this is going to come into the cap table bit, I think,
Yep.
which is like you were early employees in these companies. Was acquisition of these impacting you? Was it not impacting you? Did you know, obviously there's the bit around like transformation of roles, but at that time, did you know about a cap table?
No. And I think every time we have co-ops, we're always like heavily involved in the like Waterloo's co-op program.
Yeah.
And at Pivotal, we went into Queens and UFT, but we're small enough right now that we're just doing Waterloo. I hope to expand that soon. But I love bringing in co-ops into our company. One, because we're a really small group, but we're really experienced, so they actually gain a lot from the experience with our pair programming. Because I don't think there's too many other co-op opportunities where you're sitting right next to somebody who has the industry experience that we have, and you're learning directly from them. Usually, you're given like a side project or something like that. Um, but also, I love teaching co-ops or like people really earlier on in their career about options and cap tables and how this stuff all works, because I had no idea throughout Extreme Labs and Pivotal. Like, they used to try to educate us, and it'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll deal with that later. um, but it's not until later where you're like, oh, I should have paid attention to
Yeah, because
this.
you're on the other side of that, right? Like you join a
Yeah.
company and they're like, "Oh, you're early employee. We're gonna pay you in French fries, and we're gonna give you like 2,000 of these options or shares." Like even then, like what is an option? What is a share? Like, but at that point, you don't really know what that means or what that translates to, or should you be asking questions? So at that moment, you were kind of just on the flip side of it. Whatever they're sending your way, you're like, "Yeah, I got it. Cool, thanks."
Yeah. And there's been enough success stories that people are like, okay, yeah, now I should look into this a little bit more. But the education around it is still, I find, lacking all the way from the employee up to the founder. A lot of people are sharing knowledge through word of mouth, not necessarily through like, institutions educating people on it. So,
Yeah. Well, I'd love to learn a little bit more today, and I think from there that kind of brought you to Mantle. So I think we'll talk a bit about that. But I have to know because I don't have a lot of technical co-founders, especially with like the rich experience that you have got on the show. I'm probably I'm pulling a number top of my head, but like 70-30, 80-20 in terms of like non-technical versus technical co-founder. I'll want to hear the origin story about Mantle, but from a technical co-founder perspective, what are you looking for in your co-founder? Because I always hear what they're
oh,
looking for, right? And it'd be interesting to see what are the things technical co-founders care about and look for many people that might be looking for one.
oh, interesting. I think that's a good question. For me personally, and I think it's going to be different for every person. Again, I kind of like see these things as like relationships. Like, it depends on your personality and how you want to be balanced out, essentially. Over the years, I know my strengths and weaknesses. Like, I know I can get past my weaknesses, especially like public talking. Like, that was like a hard thing. You do like all of the was it Toastmasters, all the practice and everything else. And you can get through it, but it's not like a natural affinity. Um, I, for my co-founders, I looked at what I want to, what my natural weaknesses are and what their natural strengths are, and try to bring those together. So, like, as a package, we're just almost like a superpower. Also, it is really nice to work with people that you've worked with before,
Mm.
especially through hard projects, because you know how they're going to handle stress. You've seen each other at your like best and worst, like working at like midnight or up until like 3 a.m. trying to get a project done. Um, Funny story at Extreme Labs, we got what was it, the World Wildlife Foundation, where they WWE by then. They came to us on a Friday and like, we need to have the app on Monday. So like, some of the people that I'm working with today were like on that kind of like project. We kind of cranked through and got it done. They want something done for Earth Hour. Um, So yeah, like after you've been through those experiences with your founder and you kind of know your strengths and weaknesses and you know how well you work with each other, um, it just clicks. And it's a really good experience because all the social dynamics of trying to figure each other out when you're like first engineering group, if you haven't worked with them before, there's just no surprises and you're all just focused purely on the problem and the product.
Cool. Well, I'm going to want to learn more about what brought you then to Mantle, or if this was an idea sparked in your own head. But let's maybe start going down that journey a little bit, which is, where and how did the journey of Mantle itself start? From Because I think from there we kind of left off. You were at VMware last, which acquired Pivotal um, software, and now you're at Mantle. So, what was sort of the inspiration for that part of the journey?
Yeah, it kind of came together a little bit like haphazardly. Um, I wouldn't say haphazardly. I think it's a collection of experiences that I never realized I had until we kind of like stumbled upon the problem space. But I remember being a manager at Extreme Labs and having to do option grants or like raises and everything else. Everything was done in a spreadsheet. Um, and then I was like, okay, we're a small company, so spreadsheets are probably fine. And then I'm like, it has to be better at a large. I'm sure large companies don't do this. And I went to Pivotal, and Pivotal went up to 5,000 people. I'm like, wait, it's still in spreadsheets. And the problem with spreadsheets as well is like spreadsheets work fine, but it's just like one, there's no checks, like checks and balances to make sure things are actually accurate. Like one bad thing in a spreadsheet and everything can kind of collapse. So at Pivotal, there was actually a ritual the managers had where we would open people's offers letters to make sure the numbers were correct and then close them again because people would take our spreadsheets, like spreadsheet from my group, an HR person would take that and like copy and paste the rows into a larger spreadsheet to make sure the numbers would add up. But the problem is they would like delete rows or get values wrong
Oh shit! I can
sometimes.
see all the fail points. I'm just looking at spreadsheet disasters, and someone writes over a cell, or like something doesn't copy, or there's like hidden rows.
Oh yeah. The worst is to telling somebody that like, hey, this person that you gave me in my spreadsheet isn't in my group anymore. They actually transferred to the West Coast. So they're like, oh, the spreadsheet that you finished halfway, I need to give you a new version now. So now I need to like copy and paste my value. Like it gets really, really bad really quickly. And then I went to VMware, and VMware actually had a bit of software, but the first step of getting your data into that software was a spreadsheet. So it's like it like across the board is just a hard, you could see it was a hard problem. Nobody wanted to manage the stuff planning, and that was just getting the numbers in. The planning around it was just word of mouth, like how many options do I have for my people? Like I don't know, like ask for some, and if you get told no, then there's not enough, kind of a thing. Like there's just, it was a lot of that. I've talked to a bunch of other like CFOs, CTOs of different companies. They all have the same kind of gripes, like, hey, somebody left. What happened to their options? I don't know. Some HR person will tell me my budget eventually, but
Yeah,
like
like
I don't
did
know
they
if I'll ever
vest?
see
Did
that
they not
again.
vest?
Yeah. So after going through experience like that, going through experiences through Pivotal and Extreme and all my previous startups, after I left VMware, I was, a bunch of people wanted me to be their CTO. And I learned to be like, hey, what is your cap table like? What is the relationship with founders? But also like, what is the percentage ownership of the founders? Like what is the actual cap table makeup or equity makeup of your company? And the amount of missteps I would see in startups where they're like, hey, we actually gave away, too much of the company, or we didn't do reverse vesting was our first, oddly enough, their first technical co-founder. They made V1 and left with a bunch of equity and we can't get that back, kind of a thing. Um, that it was a high percentage where people would have these missteps to the point where you would look at their cap table and be like, okay, there's no room for another exec or a lot of employees coming in, so this is going to add up to a bad situation unless they do something major. So that was actually a major criteria for me, like figuring out my next thing. And then one of the co-founders, Amar Varma, he got rid of his golden handcuffs from Ford. That group went to Autonomic and then acquired by Ford. And he was kind of reviewing his investments and noticed like he was in all these funds and everything else, but there was no system to keep it all in one place. Um, so we eventually landed on this, like, hey, we need to start at the cap table. We're noticing it's a problem pretty much everywhere. People running into these disaster scenarios, especially as we're deeper in the startup ecosystem now. We're talking to a lot of people. We're noticing some like weird stuff back then and still now, and we just want to make the whole space better, right? And it's
So
great that
this
we
is
get to
just
dog food
like
as we grow.
ideating where you had both kind of reached this moment simultaneously in your career journeys, where you were on the flip side of like having a little bit of freedom and space to be like, yeah, we've been parts of companies, we've been grinding, we've had some options and stocks or different things through those. Oh shit, what did I actually get through all that? Like, there's some money in my bank account, but like now everyone on the other side of this is like, we didn't pay as much attention as we should. Now we're eyes wide open trying to pay attention. We're looking at what we got and we're like, this is a mess. Like, should we solve this mess? That's sort of like where you got to.
Yeah. And it had the like perfect Venn diagram of like our skills and experiences. And then also like us knowing, go through the experiences. We had the network to know that like, hey, that we can really drive some change forward in this particular space. Um, so yeah, that's just what we're doing.
All right. So let's talk Mantle. You're on a show called Pitch, please. So
Mhm.
Dwayne, the first thing we're going to have to do is get your best pitch, please.
Oh gosh. So for any founder that has to manage their equity, they know the trials and tribulations of dealing with all the paperwork, dealing with lawyers, um, but also they know the fact that they can't get insights properly. So there's a lot of paperwork in getting burn down charts, scenario planning for your exits, doing hiring plans, everything else against your equity. And Mantle just gives you all that automation so you can just focus on your business and leave all that stuff to us.
That's so simply put. Maybe super wise here will be to actually talk, and I think we might, as we're going through this, I'm realizing we're gonna have to go do a whole other episode just based on your background and experience, where we just call the damn episode cap tables, because I think most people don't even know what the hell a cap table is, never
Yeah.
mind the complexities of managing one. And that is a challenge, right, for first time founders or even second time founders. Like, you've learned a couple things, but until you've like triggered something that went poorly, you just might not know. You just, hey, Dwayne, you want to go at this? Yeah, man. 50-50. Cool. Yeah, we're good. Hey, some investor wants to give us some money. Okay. They want 20%. Okay. I guess that makes this like 40-40 and they take 20. Like, it gets way more complicated than that. And then you don't know, do you turn to your lawyer? Do you turn to your accountant? Do you turn like who? And so maybe let's just give like the light version, which is like what exists other than spreadsheets. Like, what exists in this space, and like where do cap tables fit in? Is it the legal document related to, how equity is split up? Do I talk to my lawyer about a cap table? Like, who is in charge of this damn cap table? The CFO, who's really the founder? Talk to us about this space.
Ultimately, it's going to be your lawyer that's in charge of a cap table if you have a lawyer. Otherwise, it's going to be the founders. There's platforms out there like us. Carta is like the big incumbent in the space where people keep their cap tables, but we find as we talk to people, it's ultimately the lawyers. And a cap table is going to be pretty much the summarization of all of your legal documents where you've dealt with the equity and ownership in your company. So as you give yourself founder shares or give employees options and everything else, that will change your cap table so you can see line item by line item who has your fully diluted ownership of your company. So you can keep track of who actually owns what in your company.
Got it. So it'll like automatically, like as dilution happens, it'll auto update everyone's numbers in some way.
Yes.
So I guess as a rollback to this, you talked about like lawyers are oftentimes the ones who may, if you're using a lawyer, have a perspective on your cap tables, but like they're not highly invested. I haven't seen in the mechanics of that. They're like, yeah, you've got this many shares. Who do you want me to issue them to? Do you kick in before that, during the actual incorporation journey? Or, hey, I've got an incorporated company. Now I want to start to dish this stuff out. Or maybe it's both.
We're looking to partner with somebody for the incorporation cycle because that's like a
Okay.
whole other business, and it's a rabbit hole for sure. But yeah, after you have an incorporated company, you can come to us and just give us your documents and we'll onboard you onto the platform.
Got it. So it takes your documents, imports your new baseline, and then you can start managing that cap table or shareholders elements. Are those also parts of this? Like shareholder agreements, acceptance of shares? Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, this sounds way better in Excel table.
Yeah, we essentially like have a whole bunch of templates for people to deal with the documents, because like a lot of people when they're like, hey, I want to do, a share agreement or an option agreement, the first thing is like, oh, I don't even know what document, like what's the legal. So that's when your lawyer comes in. But we also provide templates if people want to use ours. They're pretty much the standard we'll get from law firms or from Y Combinator and everything else if you're doing safes. um, but yeah, essentially in the platform, when you want to issue shares or options, instead of emailing your lawyer, you can do it in the platform. We'll help you model it, let you put it into draft mode, tell you the effects of it before it actually happens. And then you can say like, hey, you can coordinate with your lawyer in the platform on when to do it and how to do it. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much like a lot of the workflows that we help with.
Cool. Can we talk for a second just on what are the ways you slice and dice a company? Like we've dropped a bunch of words that maybe not everyone's as familiar with, like safes and shares and options. And what is like the difference between these? And, let's talk about it from the founder side, but also from the employee side, because maybe that's where people are familiar with it, right? Maybe they're working at a startup or working at a larger company and they have some of these things. Um, and we're gonna have to go do it. The more I'm realizing it, we're gonna need to do a whole episode just on this. But maybe at a high level, just explain what some of those elements of what you're managing of those paper splits are.
Yeah, the an important part of this world that I realized throughout my journey is that there's almost no rules as well. So there's a lot of like common ways of distributing equity. So you have like your shares or you have like your safes, and like safes are convertibles. Oh man, we can get really deep into convertibles, but um, essentially saying that like, hey, it's a promise for future equity. Once you companies a certain amount of a certain value, like you'll get this much money. Essentially, putting it plainly. And then you have things like options that you'll give to your employees at certain strike prices, and you're saying like, "Hey, we're going to hope that the company's worth a lot more than this price that we're giving you, but here's our promise: it's a certain percentage of the company at a certain price, and if we do well, it goes great." They never usually talk about the other case where it goes down, but that's a whole other thing, and that's handled in different ways at different companies. And that's part of the employee education side of it too. Um, but yeah, there's almost infinite ways for people to slice up their company, and us making a platform that has like certain parameters and like this is how you do things. It's interesting to come across paperwork where people have accepted terms where it's just like, hey, if my dog barks 3 times, then your interest gets reset by this percentage, and you're like, what? So it's like, there are some really interesting, especially through COVID and then through the downturn. There have been terms on safes or term sheets where people have been getting a little bit creative
Mm.
um, about what they put into these agreements. So it's always great to have a lawyer to look over them, to like double check. But also we can help out as well.
Got it. And so to bring us back, so you don't focus on the setting up of an incorporation. That do with a lawyer, and you guys will partner on there. You don't deal with the signing of the paperwork related to where and how shares and options are cascaded, but you're the in between and you basically take in the snapshot. Let's call it a snapshot of someone's equity structure and allow them to track all of the elements of what that is, and then future changes, then plinko across all of it, and then model scenarios. Hey, I want to give 10% equity to Dwayne. What does that do for everyone? Is that sort of the high level of it? And then based on that, like what's cool about what you're saying is I'm trying to imagine it now. So maybe walk us through it, but it's just as valuable to the founders, I guess, as potentially the people that are getting options or shares. Are you built for both sides to be able to have better education and transparency around this, or today are you focusing on one of those two sides?
Right now, we're focused on the founders. In the next year, we want to really beef up the employee side. Um, but your summary was bang on. I'll say that we also do the signing in
Okay,
the
cool.
platform.
On
So
the
if you want to
not the
actually
front
get
end, not the initial setup of the incorporation, but the cascading of shares and options
yes,
and those types of things.
everything past incorporation we can handle in the platform.
Wow.
And instead of creating a PDF, so it's funny. A lot of founders will have like that one Word document that's their option agreement. They'll go in there and they're like, "Oh, I need to give this person options." They'll like do a find and replace for the date. Sometimes miss the second date and replace the first date, which is always an interesting problem to have because you have to redo the whole document to make it clear. But they'll put in the name and then they'll email it to the employee or like maybe do a DocuSign, but they have to keep track of all this stuff, right? So we've had cases where founders have sent employee agreement or agreements to employees and they haven't signed it. Like they forgot to follow up and everything else. Like we'll handle all that workflow in the platform. We'll give you reminders. We'll tell you who hasn't signed anything, and make sure that all of that is tracked in one system. And then as things are signed and completed and the lawyers agree to it and the employee agreement or shareholders agree to it, it automatically adjusts your cap table.
That's cool. And now, how complex, like you said, startups, but I imagine like most companies could value from this, and there's different complexities of their multi-tiered, intricate corporate structures. They've got like head companies and if different branch arms. Can basically any business use Mantle?
Yeah. Any private company, I would say.
Okay.
Public's a whole different beast.
Yeah.
But any private company can essentially, has these problems at different scales and in different ways. But we're set up to handle any private company in reality.
That's amazing. And so maybe let's learn a little bit more about um, how you charge. Like it sounds like you're a platform and it's for founders and it helps for everyone else. Is this like a one-time fee, an annual fee, a monthly fee? You don't even have to share the price if you don't want to, or you can. I don't know how that works, but how do you sort of use Mantle once you bought into the vision of this platform, which it sounds like it's going to save people a ton of time and mistakes, and those probably cost a lot of money and time with lawyers, and so avoiding that's one massive piece of value. But how do you sort of set up and start using Mantle as a founder?
I mean, right now we have a promotion for 1 year free, so it doesn't really cost you anything to get started. After that, um, for everything that's before like a Series B, we'll do like $100 a month, so it's not too bad compared to some other solutions in the space.
It's way cheaper than any of those mistakes that we just talked about, huh?
Yes, yes. Oh gosh, yes. But what we do is we'll collect a company's data room, which if you're just starting, it's probably your incorporation document, maybe a few founder share documents, or if you're a large company, we can take hundreds. We had one company come to us with I think around 400 documents, and we've actually made the way our tool works and a little bit of a differentiator for us, but it's a huge differentiator for the people actually using the platform is we use AI to analyze all the documents in the data room. And we make sure that the values in those documents are actually represented properly in the platform. So that means anybody who wants to onboard with us, they kind of just give us the documents, and within minutes, we come up with a cap table. Whereas before that, depending on how many documents, that the company has 400 documents, a lawyer or a founder would have to go through document by document and manually create that cap table from scratch by
Mm.
typing in the numbers and the dates.
And this like
Um,
kind of cleans up your house too, right? Like it'll point out if there's some mistakes in all the paperwork you think you got in order,
yeah,
but theoretically, because you're bringing this all together in a centralized manner, you're catching potentially some mistakes along the way or some gaps that need to be resolved.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. I went to a meetup probably about a month ago, and there's this really experienced CFO there, and I told him what we were doing, and he's like, "Thank God you're doing that work." He's like, "I've been the CFO of 10 not small companies, like they're medium-sized companies." And he's like, "Every one of them, once he took over the cap table, they were all wrong." and they all had to like redo the cap table, go through every document, and get it up to speed again because they'll just drift over time. Um, but yeah, it's awesome to see our system catch inconsistencies or mistakes from the documents to the platform,
Yeah.
and just like tell people like, hey, just catch up on this before it becomes a real problem.
So talk to me a little bit about the space then. And you don't even have to, you named Carta, but I guess there are some competitors in this space, some of them being spreadsheets. But, what are sort of the things that are different? Let's focus on the difference and the value add. And you mentioned a bit of it before, but where Mantle stands out versus others in this space.
Yeah, we find that like a lot of other solutions in the space are kind of used as a record of truth after the fact. So,
Mm,
in terms of actually doing the work around the cap table and equity, they won't do it in the platform themselves. They'll do it off to the side in spreadsheets. And then once they're done all the work and all the calculations, then they'll put it into the platform. So we find that with a lot of other platforms, founders never log into them. They don't use them as the source of truth because they always assume that the lawyer or their email is filled with something that is like in progress. So it's never the most up to date picture. So we find when people come to our platform, they feel very refreshed that they're like, oh, like this is all the work in progress stuff. This is all the stuff that's in draft. I can accurately do some future looking work. So a lot of other platforms don't really have a lot of the future looking tools that we're providing. um, and a lot of it is insights that are driven by board and investors asking these questions like
yeah.
you know like what's your burn down chart for your option pool look like, right? Like, okay, a founder needs to stop what they're doing, look at their spreadsheet, probably make some pivot tables, and then like put in a planning thing and like try to get that done. Whereas we just have that in the platform, right? If you have the options in the platform, we'll show you the burn down over the next few years. You can just copy and paste it and give it to a board member or investor or whoever's asking, and get it signed and move on with your day instead of spending a few days with a pivot table and going back and forth, yada yada yada.
Got it. So you really focus on being the central source of truth. And I guess the other unintended benefit is you digitize all of their legal documents because I think that's the other thing, right? People are like, where's that signed copy of something? And then moving forward, you manage that in a digital way. So
Yes.
the record is there. It's not in a damn binder at someone's house that no one remembers who took it home. And that confusion goes away because there's a digital footprint of this past and forward looking, which seems super valuable because if you can, own it end to end, like you're saying, including dishing out new shares or, options, that record is centralized and continues to be updated in a digital way because you're not, to your point, on the side, hey, go sign this paper, bring it back to me. Oh, and then you upload it. You're owning it end to end after that.
Yeah, a really important, like that whole flow is really important to optimize because that takes up a ton of time from people's kind of like day to day. Like, hey, I need to get this document signed. It's not signed yet, and now your 409A valuation is expired. Like, what do I do then? Like, you get to make a new document, all of this stuff, whatever. Um, but it's really important. A really important aspect of our platform is that we always, for every operation, we always generate a bespoke document for the company. So we have the digital version; it is digitized as tracked, but we always generate a PDF that has your lawyer's format or whatever format you put into the system attached to every operation that happens in there. So if there's an amendment, you need an amendment document. If there's an agreement or an issuance, you need that issuance document. Because at the end of the day, if you get audited, they will look at the documents. They won't look at the platform. So that's why we like working from the documents up. Because again, platforms that don't do that, your platform can say whatever you want, but when they want the documents and they can't find it, then you're in a lot of trouble. You have to do a lot of legal work.
Got it. Well, man, this sounds so useful. What sort of the next year ahead have in store for Mantle, and what are sort of your ambitions around where and how this is going to kind of unfold in 2024?
We're going to go deeper into the employee space. I think there's a ton of education to do there. There's always we're always trying to figure out how open companies want to be because like I find through my experience, like some companies were very open about talking about options equity, and some of them were a little bit they kept it closer to their chest.
Intentionally vague.
Yeah, I never know if it's intentional. Maybe it is, but like, how do you reason about that? Educate employees, but also respect the wishes of the company. So that's something we're going through, but that's something that we definitely want to ramp up. Again, me going through some of my early experiences and being like, I don't know what this monopoly money options thing is. I'll leave it till later. I don't want other people to have those experiences. At least give them an avenue to learn about it and reason about it, especially in real time with their own data instead of like as an abstract concept. Um, yeah, just going through like exit scenarios and reasoning about that would be very, very cool. So we're going to invest in that. We have a whole bunch of tools for founders and lawyers. We're going to keep on pumping out more planning tools and versioning and everything else on the founder side. So we have a lot of features. We have new versions of our price round calculator. We have the waterfall calculators, more full featured waterfall calculators coming out. So you can see exactly down to per employee on your exit scenario. If you sold for 50 million, $100 million, you can say this particular employee will get this much money. So you can
That's
plan
cool.
ahead and do things. So a lot of really cool visualizations and planning tools
Does
coming out.
Mantle technically then help me as an organization forego at least some of the overhead related to the legal costs associated with the issuing of shares? Like
Yeah.
once you formulated a new company, everything you do after that, instead of paying a lawyer for every single edit, sounds like can be platform generated. And there's still a legally binding document that comes at the end and then is stored, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting to talk to. So we're talking to a bunch of different law firms. Um, and kind of going into these conversations, I'm like, well, they're billable work. So I think we're a little bit like, how much are they going to really care about automating this part of it, right? Because somebody would message them, they're like, hey, I need a burn down chart or I need to know this information. They'd end up charging them for that work. So I'm like, are we taking away billable hours from these law firms and everything else? And as we talk to, like, we're talking to some of the biggest law firms in North America, and there's a very unanimous like, hey, we don't want that work. Right?
Yeah.
Like we're
That's
kind of
not where we
tired of
want to spend
companies
our
bugging
billable
us about
time.
these little things. Like we want all the big work. We have like a backlog of these big operational things. We actually want companies to be more effective by themselves in this, right? So they're actually like super interested in everything that we're doing. And those conversations are going really well. So I was surprised about how engaged they were in making these problems kind of go away, and just having everybody just work in a better way.
That's cool. Well, obviously, at this point, we've probably piqued some people's interest. And say they want to find out more, either as maybe an employee of an organization that wishes their organization use this, or as a new founder, because I think this is like day zero type stuff. Whether you're just when you're starting a company, the second you're going to bring on, even with two co-founders, like get your stuff in order right away. Or maybe you're a bigger organization that just needs to clean house and get things kind of cleaned up. Where should people go to find out more or to sign up?
Is withmantle.com. You can go there, click on the demo link, or you can just reach out to me. I'm on X. Do we call it X or Twitter? I'm going to
I
call it
don't
Twitter.
know.
I'm on Twitter.
Yeah, it's like
Uh,
going to Costco, right?
yeah.
Head to the Sky Dome.
Yeah, on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm usually more active on those two. But yeah, withmantle.com, click on the demo link and just set up a time. We can go through the platform, talk about what you need. Yeah.
I love it. And ironically, you have a badass domain because you actually have mantle.com. There's no like weird spelling. Everyone is literally just mantle.com, which is pretty sweet.
Oh, we're
Uh,
actually with mantle.com. We couldn't get mantle.com.
with mantle.com. Close. Close.
Yes.
So with mantle.com. But we're going to make sure everything's linked in the description. Anyway, it sounds like they've got an amazing offer for anyone for their first year to start using this. And it sounds like you'll see the value right away. Dwayne, we've like talked about so many things. I'm taking you up. If you're good to invest a bit more time, I would love to do an episode just on understanding cap tables, the do's and don'ts, the simplification for people accepting options or shares as an employee, which it sounds like might even fold into something you have in the roadmap for the year. But also on the other side, like I feel so bad because so many first time founders, because you're doing so many things, everyone just moves forward with the assumption, they spit words at you and they make you feel like it's bad to ask questions. And so I think it'd be great to have an open dialogue around that sometime over the coming months. But any kind of parting thoughts or words? You shared so much advice. I've loved it so far. I've learned a ton myself. But I always want to make sure that we close off on any thoughts from yourself before we kind of wrap up.
Yeah. No, I think a follow up conversation would be great. Um, and just like the parting thoughts, I keep on thinking about this one interaction we had. I think about 3 weeks ago, we were talking to I think the incubation group for UFT. There's this student who was creating a startup. They're getting a bunch of money, and they're like, uh, or the incubator was like, "Hey, you should get on this platform." They ended up talking to us, and we're explaining like, "Hey, here's your cap tables, options, shares, safes, yada yada yada." And the blank stare that was coming through the screen was like, it was like I was like, oh, I think they are really focused on like their problem and creating the startup and all this stuff that's being thrown at them. You can see it's like really overwhelming. So we kind of slowed down the conversation. We're like, hey, you know, as you go through this, he's just like, okay, I really like this is a lot to process. He's like, I need to have a follow up conversation later after I do some research. Um, but we're just trying to help with that shell shock of like, hey, what is with all of these terms? How do I reason about it? You know, if everything is done through word of mouth, that means everybody is doing something a little bit different. And we're just helping people reason about all of those different variations of managing equity in a company and bringing light and telling you like, hey, what does this tangibly mean for you at the end of the day, either now or in 5 years? That's the platform that we want to be for folks. So you can focus on your company, on the problem, and really spending your time on delighting your user base or customers, whatever you have, um, and less time on being like, confused or perplexed by all these like terms and concepts. So we've been getting really good feedback thus far. Happy to have anybody and everybody on the platform. And yeah, looking forward to creating a bunch of new features and delightful things for people over the next year. It's been great thus far.
I love it. Definitely helping keep people get things in order before money starts flowing in. And I love that you're doing some great work even on your blog to help simplify some of this stuff down for people. I think that's like even something that I deal with at my job at Microsoft is just at some point companies need to focus on the problems that they're solving and where they add value and not try to be everything. And so whether that's augmenting with external partnership help, whether that's like stopping trying to focus on running a data center and updating security patches, like that's where cloud native fits in. And whether it's legal or finance and accounting, like where do you have to invest as a company and where can you just like augment and simplify? And it sounds like Mantle's truly fitting into that for everything related to your cap table, shares, equity, options, all of that world of pain that probably lawyers and CFOs are just cringing at the way some things are set up. And you're trying to help also make sure that it's better and people on both sides of the fence have extreme transparency.
Yeah.
Can't wait for that next episode where we have you on and we talk just cap tables. I like I said, I know some stuff, but at the end of the day, there's a whole bunch of stuff I don't know, and there's so many things that are until you've dealt with it, you don't know all the gotchas. So I'm curious to learn for myself, but on behalf of others too. Love the work you're doing with Mantle. Love your journey. Again, let me know where and when you're going to go to a company because it seems like you got that like acquired aura. I'll come join you. But but thank you so much for joining on the podcast today, Dwayne. I really appreciated the learning experience today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I love the conversation, and yeah, I'd be happy to come back anytime. I think the platform is great. I think the show is great. It's awesome.
Love it. And to anyone that joined, make sure to catch us on the next episode and keep your eyes out for one where we deep dive into cap tables and everything related to equity splits.
Yes.
Again, thanks for joining in on the Pitch Please podcast. Catch you guys on the next episode.